Welcome back to the VA Rebellion podcast, the podcast for virtual assistant business owners who are done winging it, done being just the admin, and ready to run a real business with real confidence and real profit. This is a show where we challenge outdated industry norms, raise the standard for what it means to be a VA, and talk honestly about building a business that feels powerful, profitable, and aligned. Today's episode is a little different, but deeply important, because while we spend a lot of time talking about building businesses, scaling income, and creating opportunities, we don't always talk about how those decisions intersect with our lives, and specifically for women, how they intersect with time, fertility, and future choice. This conversation is not about pressure. It's not about telling you what you should do. It's about awareness, agency, and giving yourself options. I'm joined by Kimberley Caines, the founder of Preserve Her, an education platform dedicated to helping women take control of their future fertility through accessible, evidence-based information on egg freezing. Kimberley is also the owner of Nico Underwear, a sustainable Australian intimates brand, and a former senior journalist with over a decade of experience covering national issues including women's health. She's incredibly passionate about reframing the conversation around fertility, timing, and choice for modern women, moving it away from fear and towards informed, empowered decision making. Kim, welcome to the VA Rebellion podcast. I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
Thank you, Kerrie. It's so amazing to be here.
Excellent. So I wanted to start with how this topic is usually presented. So a lot of messaging around fertility and egg freezing can feel really fear-based or urgent. How do you reframe this conversation so it feels empowering rather than overwhelming?
I think the biggest shift is moving away from that fear-based messaging. Things like your fertility is declining or time is running out. These kind of, sentences can really shut people down and be quite alarming. Instead, we want to frame it as an understanding of options, understanding your options earlier so you can make decisions from a place of clarity, not urgency. The whole goal here isn't about creating pressure, it's actually to remove it. And I think a lot of women only ever hear about fertility in quite a clinical setting or in a negative context, usually when something is wrong. So, what I'm really trying to do is bring that conversation in earlier in a much more neutral and empowering way. So, that's the whole thing about Preserve Her is empowering women to take control of their future fertility, not feeling that pressure.
Yeah, you talk a lot about preserving choice. And so that's kind of what you're talking about here. So what does that actually mean in real terms for women, especially those in business?
To me, preserving choice means creating options before you actually need them. So, if you look at business, for instance, we build these options in everything that we need to do and before we actually need to do them. So, we're sort of forecasting. But when it comes to fertility, it's something that's just an afterthought. So it might look like a woman in, say, her late 20s or into her 30s just simply learning about her fertility, understanding the timeline. So that's really important. And then deciding what she might want to do with that or not do with that. So egg freezing isn't the best option for everyone, but until we learn about it and learn about the options available to us, we just don't know. So even if she chooses not to freeze her eggs, she's making that decision from a place of awareness and not later when it feels like a rushed or limited decision because she's running out of time, for
Yeah.
instance.
And it can change so much, right? You know, from 25 to 30 to
Mm.
40, that
Mm.
what goes on with your eggs, I would imagine quality can change over that
Yeah,
period of time. So I'm guessing the awareness
yeah,
earlier is so much
100%.
more
Yeah,
powerful, right? Instead of waiting until it's
yeah.
urgent.
Because that's the thing, timing changes. Yeah, exactly. So timing changes everything. When you learn earlier, you then have space to think, space to plan, space to decide. But when you're learning later, it often comes with that pressure. Fertility shouldn't be a last minute conversation. It's something that we should be educated on and talking about from even in high school. When we're in high school, we're told how not to have a baby, but we're not told what happens when we're struggling to fall pregnant. So, yeah, it just gives a lot more control over the way that you respond when you have this awareness. And I think a lot of women don't know that we're actually born with all of the eggs we'll ever have. And as the years go on, where every cycle we're losing eggs. So the older we get, the wear and tear is there. And that's why we're seeing a lot more people having to go through things like IVF because we're having children later in life. That's just a matter of fact, and we can't change that. And a big thing that we hear is from women saying, oh, I wish I knew about this earlier. Why weren't we ever taught about this when we were younger? And so that's what Preserve Her is all about, just trying to educate women so they know about their options and can plan for the future.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up IVF because we do, like, I know a lot more people that have to go down that path these days. And, you know, 30, 40 years ago, we probably never heard much about it, right? But, you know, 1 in 5 people that I know have probably gone through IVF. And if they had had this information and this education sooner, maybe they might not have.
Yeah. And that's so true. And when you say 1 in 5, it could even be higher than that. But a lot of people keep this to themselves. It's egg freezing, IVF. It can be quite a heartbreaking thing for couples and individuals who are going through a tough time. So a lot of people don't talk about it. But even just going back to when I froze my eggs when I was 28, back then, and that was only 7 years ago now, no one even spoke about egg freezing. I didn't even tell anyone at the time that I was going through the process because no one would understand what I was going through. So it is really positive now that we are starting to talk about these fertility struggles or these options available to us because it's getting the awareness out there, which is so important.
Yeah, it is really important. And we see, so for a lot of women listening to this podcast, they're in that phase of building their business, growing the income, and creating stability. And those years often overlap with when fertility becomes a consideration, right? Or when you're told that that's the best time. So, how do you see that tension kind of play out when you're talking to other female business owners?
It's very real. And the years women are building their careers or businesses, say their late 20s or into their 30s, is also the key fertility years as well. So I do see this a lot with women who are in that growth mode and they're reinvesting everything focused on momentum, building something meaningful with their businesses, and then fertility becomes something that they'll think about later. And so businesses rarely have a perfect pause point, as you would know. Like we're always go, go, go. There's always something that we're working on. And fertility doesn't always wait for the perfect moment either. So I guess the biggest point I would really like to get across is just having these conversations, not letting fertility be this afterthought. Plan it like we plan our businesses. It's just something that is so vital because when it comes to our eggs, we can't replace those once our eggs are gone, but we can always build another business. We can always acquire another business. So I just think we need to be putting as much effort and interest into something that's so important as we do with our businesses as well.
And, you know, like there's quite a few women out there often, you know, they start in their 20s. I'm never having kids, right? You know, they go through that phase when they're like,
Yeah.
no way, right? I'm never doing that. But, you know, a lot of
Yeah.
women actually
Yeah.
change their minds later, right? And then, you know, that's
Mm.
when the whole urgency
Yeah.
might kick in. So, you even if you're not thinking about having kids, it's something that you should potentially still look into just in case you change your mind, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's something that I do see when I'm talking with a lot of women. They say, "Oh, I'm just not sure if I want to have children." The issue that happens is then they get to an age that they're maybe, say, in their 40s, and they go, "Oh, actually, it would be nice." But for them, it's going to be a lot harder to go through for like IVF or egg freezing because they might have to go through, say, a couple of rounds or multiple rounds because their eggs are the quality and the quantity of them are a lot less than, say, when they were in their late 20s or early 30s. So I think the thing with egg freezing that a lot of women think is like, oh, I've got to go through this process and then like I'm going to have to use these eggs. For me, I hope I never have to use my frozen eggs. But having that peace of mind to know that they are there as a backup if I ever do need to use them has given me so much peace of mind and has been so worth going through that process. And who says that maybe I might fall naturally pregnant with my first child, but then as I get older, maybe I'll struggle to have my second child. So just having that option there is like, it's such an empowering feeling.
Curious, so I'm just kind of, getting sidetracked here because that's quite common for me. But so if they did go through the process and they did it because they didn't think they were going to have kids, um, and
Yeah.
they froze their eggs, they get to their 40s and 50s and still really don't want to have kids, can they actually donate them to those who
Mhm. Yeah.
can they
So
put them
there's
to
quite
good
a few
use?
options actually. So yeah, 100%. So you can either donate them to science, you can donate them to either, say, a couple that might be trying for a baby, or even an individual who is looking to start a family, and that can be anonymously or someone that you know. You can discard them as well. So if you don't want to use those eggs, you can have them discarded. So there's all those options. So it's they can be put to use. And also in Australia, we do have an egg shortage. So I know a couple of years ago, my fertility clinic, who is storing my eggs, sent me an email and said, "Oh, we're looking for egg donors." So that also is something that's so important and a way to give back and help another person as well.
That's really nice. It's good to know that
Mm.
there's options if you decide not
Yeah,
to use them, right? Because
yeah,
they
yeah.
probably don't think about that either.
No, no, they don't.
Yeah. So, what are some of the conversations you think women in business should be having with themselves earlier, even if they're not sure what they want long term? Like, I mean, we covered a little bit there, but is there anything else that kind of comes up for you when you're talking to women around?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think simple ones are, do I want to have children one day? And asking yourself that, or what might my timeline look like? So if you do have a partner, I think it's so important to be having these conversations in your relationship. So, we plan, like I said a bit earlier, like we will plan a holiday or we plan for our businesses, but then often this one is not talked about. But it's so important to be on the same page so you know what the future looks like. Another one could be, what do I actually know about my fertility right now? So, a lot of women don't even know what their fertility is like. And there's a few tests out there where you can test what your ovarian reserve is. So, in simple terms, what your egg count is. So, there's a test called an AMH test, which is a simple blood test, and that can give an indication of how many eggs you have. So, it's just an average. I think a lot of people look at it and might either go either way. They might say, oh, wow, I've got lots of eggs. I don't need to rush into anything. Or I might not have as many eggs as I thought I would have at this age. So, oh my gosh, I need to freeze my eggs. But it's just an indication of how many eggs you have. And these sorts of tests just get you learning about your health. I think as well, um, a lot of women say might be on contraception like the pill, and they might have an underlying health issue that they don't even know they have. So, say they might have endometriosis or PCOS, where it's the medication is actually masking a health issue. And then when they come off that medication and they go to try and have a baby, and they're like, what's going wrong? And then might be later down the track diagnosed with something they didn't know they have. So I think if women are on a contraception and they do have the ability to go off it for a short period just to track their cycle, I think that's a really good thing. We you don't always need to have all these answers, but I think just asking these questions to yourself earlier can completely change the path forward. So, yeah.
We often don't get taught cycle really well in school.
No.
To the depth that we really need to understand
Yeah.
it. That's hence the reason half of us
Yeah.
end up on
100%.
contraception because, they think that we're mental because we
Yeah.
go through these ups and downs. So
Yeah.
it's the easiest way to manage,
Exactly. We've got
really.
these hormones. Yeah.
Just take over,
Yeah.
right? It's like you
100%.
said,
Our hormones
second
are
personality.
all over
We're
the
just
place. And yeah.
so
Yeah.
let's talk practically and but gently, obviously. So for someone who has no idea what egg freezing actually
Mm.
involves, what does the process look like
Yeah.
at a high level?
Yeah, of course. So it starts with the testing. So the AMH test that I just mentioned, you would be sent. So you'd first have a consultation with a fertility clinic, and then you would be sent to have a couple of tests, which is the blood test. So the fertility doctors know roughly your egg count. You might also do ultrasounds as well, where they can look at a similar thing. And this is just to understand your hormone levels and your ovarian reserve. From there, it's actually quite a quick process egg freezing. So it goes for around 10 to 14 days, and this involves hormone injections to stimulate the ovaries. So every day you'll be giving yourself a injection into your stomach, and then what happens is, for me, every second day I had to go into the fertility clinic to have a blood test and an ultrasound so they can track your levels to just see, okay, are these stimulating injections working? Do we need to up the dose? Do we need to change anything? So you do need to be quite dedicated for this 10 to 14 days, because doing the injection every day has to be done at the same time every day. So you have to be disciplined. And then once you go through this process, it's then followed by a short procedure to collect the eggs, and you're put to sleep, but it's only for about 15 minutes to half an hour. And that's where the eggs are collected and then they are frozen. So, yeah, it's like I said, it's a relatively short procedure. And I think for some women, it's not so much the physical aspect of it. It's can be like the emotional and mental decision as well going through all of this, because I guess it depends why you're doing egg freezing. Is it because you're single? Is it because you're career driven? Is it because you're not ready to start a family? Is it because you're trying and something is not working? So it can be quite an emotional thing as well. And because we're putting all these hormone injections into our stomach, it is playing with our hormones. I had a very good experience. I think the only real side effect I had was my tummy was very bloated. So I felt almost like I was carrying a baby in my stomach for this 10 to 14 days, because every day you're putting these injections into yourself, it's growing your follicles. So instead of just growing this one follicle that's released with your cycle every month, you're growing multiple, and you do get a little bit bloated. Other women say they feel fatigued or just a bit moody or have headaches and things like that. But it's all done and dusted after sort of that 14 days. And then after you've had your egg collection, usually you take that day off work and you're pretty much back to normal after that. So, yeah, I was surprised how quick and easy it all was. And yeah, I think it's just such an incredible experience for such just a short period. But like I said, you do have to be dedicated for that couple of weeks that you're going through that process, just because you obviously want to get the best outcome that you can.
Sounds like the surgery part is, or the procedure part is the simpler part.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is 100%. But it's almost like you are trying to fall pregnant. You're told, don't drink alcohol, watch what you eat, don't do excessive exercise because you are going through this process and this procedure. So yes, it is quite a different experience, and it's just for a couple of weeks and then back to normal.
Cool. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions or myths that you see around this topic?
I think the biggest one that I hear a lot is egg freezing is a guarantee. It's not. So let me just elaborate on that a little bit. So I think people go into egg freezing thinking, oh, I'm going to get, say they freeze or get 12 eggs, and they go, oh, I could have 12 babies with these eggs. But it's about giving you options. So when you go through the process, and if you freeze the eggs, you're not making them into embryos, you then freeze them, but then if you ever go to use them, they have to thaw them out. They then have to fertilize them with sperm and then do the transfer. And not all of those eggs are going to survive that process. So it's not a guarantee that this is going to work. And I think that's a big myth, is that people think, okay, I've done it now, I'm set. The way I like to put it is, for me, I am so grateful I went through the process at 28 years old. That's unheard of. And I was actually one of the youngest women in Australia to do that for a non-medical reason. And the reason I did that was just to have the best quality eggs that I could have if I need to use my frozen eggs. And yeah, the way I like to put it is, if I ever get to the point that I do need to use those and it doesn't work, I can go, okay, I tried absolutely everything at the youngest age I possibly could, and it didn't work. I'm not going to get to, say, 40 something and then go, oh, why didn't I freeze my eggs at 28 when I knew about it and I had that opportunity? So I think it's just, again, giving that peace of mind. Another, I guess, misconception is that it's something you only think about later, when actually the conversation is often more valuable earlier, like we've said, even if you don't take action. So even if women are just, say, educating themselves and learning about egg freezing and don't go through the process, it's better to have that knowledge than getting to a point that you haven't understood what happens. And that's where majority of women fall. They get to an age, and like I said earlier, they just say, oh my gosh, why was this not ever explained to us? Like, why aren't people talking about this? And now I've got to an age that I actually can't do anything about my fertility because it is too late. So that's why just education is so, so important.
All these bits that we should have been talking 20 years ago. You know, it's just
Yeah.
history, how it all
Yeah.
works, right? So if someone
Yeah.
is listening and feels really curious, but they're not ready to make any decisions, how can they explore this in a way that feels safe and informed without that pressure?
I feel like a broken record, but yeah, starting with education. Yeah. And I think that could be as simple as reading something about egg freezing or speaking to a clinic. That could be the first step, or attending something like a webinar. So there are a lot of things out there now that has a lot more information on egg freezing. Like I said, just as early as, or just 7 years ago, that's not that long ago that I went through this. Not one person in my circle, family, friends, had been through egg freezing. I didn't have anyone to turn to ask any questions like, what was the process like? What's the costings? You know, how did you feel? How did you feel going through this? I didn't have that option. Whereas now it is becoming more talked about. There's a lot more information out there now. I think the great thing about my business, Preserve Her, is that it's coming from a place of non biased, informed information from lived experience. It's not coming from a clinic where the information before Preserve Her was mostly just clinic related, where obviously they're trying to get you in to go through the process. Whereas we want to have this community where people are chatting to each other. We have a private Facebook group where women in there are talking about going through the process and getting other women's opinions who have been through it or about to go through it themselves. And that's what we're all about. We're just wanting to make women feel like they can ask these questions to people who have been through it. And that just wasn't available to me just 7 years ago. So just having conversations and yeah, yeah, it definitely is.
Cost is often a big part of that conversation. So, what should women realistically expect, and how can sole traders or business owners start thinking about this as part of their broader financial planning?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, this is actually the number one question I get asked all the time. And this has come from day one of when I froze my eggs and when I started to do media about it. I'd get women sliding into my DMs, and every question was, how much is it? So that's when I really learnt that cost is the biggest barrier to egg freezing. And at Preserve Her, we're lobbying the government to try and get a subsidy or rebate to make this more affordable so it's available to all women, not just those who can afford it. So in Australia, the cost ranges on average, it's around $8,000 to $10,000 per cycle, depending on the clinic and the medications. So some clinics will charge for every step. They will charge for the testing, they'll charge for the medications, the actual process, the anesthesis and hospital fees, the storage fees. Some of them do more of like a bulk amount where some of it you would just pay like a lump sum for something. Then there's the ongoing storage fees. But on average overall, it's about $8,000 to $10,000. Some might be a little less, some might be a little more. And then there's an ongoing storage fee, and that averages around $600 a year. Every time I tell women the price of egg freezing, you just hear this sigh like, oh, like it's so out of reach. And that breaks my heart because I know so many more people would go through this process if they had the funds to do it. And I guess I like to use the analogy of we will spend money on things like, you know, trying to buy a house or a car or a holiday or a fancy handbag. But all of these things we can replace. And when it comes to our fertility, when our eggs are gone, we can't replace them. So it's such an important thing. And I just hope that we're able to get the government to get on board to make this more affordable because I know a lot more women would go through it. Another thing that I've seen in America is that big businesses like Google and companies like that will actually fund egg freezing for their employees. So the whole thing is trying to keep women in the workforce. We are working later. That's why we're having children later in life. Like a whole dynamic of our lifestyles are so different to, you know, our parents and our grandparents' generations. So there's that incentive where some big corporates will include that as an incentive for their female employees. And I think that's incredible. And I would love to see more of that happening in Australia so that not trying to force women to just work and never have children, but it just gives them that option. So if they are having children later in life, they've then got that other option and they don't have to stress about trying to pay for it. Because the other thing to keep in mind is the later you do go through the process of egg freezing, the more cycles you're likely to need. So that 8 to 10 grand will probably double in price. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
like a really good reframe that kind of came to mind then while you were talking is it's an investment in your
Mm,
legacy. Like you talked
mm,
about how
yeah,
we're happy to spend money to buy a house or things like that. And yes, we know it's not 100% guaranteed that they'll work, but it's an investment in your legacy. And if you're willing to invest in your
mm,
legacy and what you leave behind, then this should be a no-brainer, right? Like
yeah,
if that's what you want to do, it's a
yeah,
no-brainer investment.
yeah. I really like that. I think that's so important because even like touching back on that point earlier about like just say you go through the process and never end up needing those eggs, like you might know someone in your life, say even a sibling that might be struggling, and you could donate an egg to them if you had to. Like there's so many empowering ways that these eggs could be used, whether you feel comfortable with that option or not. But yeah, in terms of legacy, this like will carry through generations, and it's just such an incredible thing that you can do for yourself is so important, and then those that follow. So it's just, yeah, for me it's a no-brainer, and I'm really glad that more women are learning about this option because I honestly feel like if more women know about this, in the decades to come, there will be less women hitting that age where they go, oh my gosh, I did not know I now can't have my own biological children because I didn't even know egg freezing was an option, to this. Like, I just, honestly, a couple of years ago, I was worried. I thought the way that we're going and just seeing women having children so much later in life, because now we are so career driven and we are having children later in life, I was worried that there would be, and it could still happen, where there will be this sort of, I guess, generation that will just completely miss their fertility window because they just didn't know that this was available. And so it would be so good now to get this information out there so people are just aware of it, whether they go through the process or not, they know that this is an option.
No, it's really important to start getting this kind of information because, like you said, like it was never
Yeah.
talked about 20, 30 years ago. You know, our
Mm,
parents and the
mm,
generation before that was never talked about, right?
yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
you were looked down on because you couldn't have kids for whatever reason that may have happened. Like a lot has changed over the generations, and I think this
Yeah.
openness and this access to knowledge is really important and it
Yeah.
really empowers a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important, powerful parts of this conversation is what happens emotionally when someone actually understands their options. And
Mm,
how does simply having that awareness shift the way women think about their future that you've seen?
yeah. So I think your mindset needs to shift from being reactive to proactive. So when it comes to fertility, majority of the time, it's actually people who are going through these processes, IVF, egg freezing, when they've been trying to have a baby and it's not working. My big thing is we need to be planning ahead of that. We need to be proactive in this. And that's where we can avoid getting to that point where we're having to make a rush decision because we're trying so much. Even if you don't take action, just understanding that these options can reduce this anxiety and give you a sense of control. So, just by going through the process, you then have that option. Like, I've spoken to women who say, oh, they wish they had known this earlier. Not necessarily that they would have done anything differently, but just that they would have felt that in control of their future and their fertility. And like I said earlier, like for me, it's just, yeah, I don't want to have to use my eggs. And I think that when I say that, people go, oh, well, why would you go through the process? But we just need that option in case it gets to a point where I need to use them. I knew at 28 years old, I was not having children anytime soon. I was so focused on my journalism career. I wasn't in a relationship at the time. And like just having a family was, I was not in a position for that. And so that's why I was proactive and I took that action and I froze my eggs. And honestly, I just think that doing that has not taken the pressure off. I think people then think, oh, now that you have these frozen eggs, will you just, have children when you're in your 40s or 50s because you've got these 28-year-old eggs there? It hasn't done that. I think it's just given me the ability to focus on things that are really important to me right now, which is, business, travel, my relationship. And when I'm ready for that time, I will obviously try naturally. And then if I struggle with that, there is those 28-year-old eggs there, which will give me a much better chance of falling pregnant than, say, 40-year-old eggs at the time. So, yeah, I think it's just yeah, it's hard because there's, like you said, emotions. There's so many things that play into this.
Nothing wrong with having a plan B.
Yes, exactly.
So, what would you say to someone who's kind of feels a little bit overwhelmed or behind or even a bit avoidant of this topic? How would you kind of reach to them?
I think I would say you're not behind. I know I sort of bang on about obviously going through this as soon as possible, but everyone's at a different point in their life. When they're learning about this, they might not be 28 years old, they might be 40 years old. So it's not that you're behind. I think you just need to make a decision as soon as possible about what you want to do. So the best time to freeze your eggs was yesterday because obviously they're younger. The longer we prolong that process, the more wear and tear there is of our fertility. But I think it's just taking one small step. For some women, just learning that information and getting that peace of mind and then making a decision that's not for me, or asking questions, any questions around the process, how it works, and starting the conversations. I'm starting to see more women talking about this in their friends groups, or like so many of my girlfriends talk to me about egg freezing now, and it's amazing. Like, I absolutely love it because then they're passing on that knowledge to other women in their life, and then that's getting passed on, and that's the best way we can get this information out there. So it's really nice to see that what used to be such a taboo topic is becoming more normalized now, and that's the best way that we can stop feeling this overwhelm of the ticking clock. Like, yes, there's a clock there ticking, and it can feel like a lot of pressure at times. I'm 35 now, and I think when I hit 35, I was like, oh my gosh, like I need to hurry up now because the clock is ticking, and it's so crazy because I still feel so young. But unfortunately for women, we do have this biological clock. And so we need to plan for that because we don't have all the time in the world, unfortunately. So it's just so important to plan. And I feel like that helps with taking the pressure off when you just have a bit of a timeline of where you're heading.
Yeah, that's really good. It's important, I think, taking pressure off because we already have so much pressure in our lives as it is. So the more that we can
Mhm.
relieve, the better and happier, more enjoyable life becomes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for anyone who wants to approach this in a calm and grounded way, I'm guessing that the first step that you would recommend is to see a clinic or just, seek out the information and the education, similar to what would be on your website.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. Education is definitely the first step, and just knowing the options available. And then when you're in a position, I would go and see a clinic if that's what you want to do, and then they can guide you through the process. But as much information you can get informed about, it will help you make those decisions from a place, I guess, of clarity instead of pressure.
Yes. And when they're going down this path, what kind of mindset shift they can completely change how they approach that conversation? What do they need to kind of think about?
I think for the mindset shift, you don't have to be ready to make a decision today. I think a lot of women think egg freezing, and then there's like, oh, I've got this clock, and if I don't make this decision today, like what's going to happen? I think you just need to be ready to understand your options. So, okay, this is what egg freezing involves. Can I afford this? Do I need to budget for this for, 1 year before I can actually go through the process? It's just really understanding your options and then making a plan around. I think, yeah, you don't need to be ready to make a decision today.
Yeah. No, that's good. That kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if you could leave women in business with one message about preserving choice and thinking ahead, what would it be?
I think it would be we don't wait until things feel urgent to build a business or acquire a business. And I don't think we should wait until things feel urgent to understand our fertility either.
No, I think that's really good because often, and this happens constantly through our lives, right? We don't make the best decisions when it's urgent.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
don't have all the choices because there's this sense of urgency, and it pops up in a lot of people's lives around health and things like that. All of a sudden something gets thrust upon them with a health condition, and then a lot of those choices disappear and they can't make the best decisions or the best choices because of all the things that go on around that. So the fact that you're talking about that, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. That's why, yeah, we just really need to be informed and talking about this and learning and educating ourselves, and that really does take the pressure off. And then having these communities as well, and having people that are like-minded going through something similar and can explain their situation and what they've been through really, really helps.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, have you seen an example where someone exploring their options earlier made a meaningful difference to how they approach their life or business later?
Yeah, I've definitely seen women who explore their options going through this earlier. And I guess the way that they would uh, look at it differently is with a place of clarity and calm. I think not because they were forced to make a decision, but because they had the information to choose. So going into business and then having been through this process, you just feel this sense of relief. And then you feel like you can really focus on what you're doing at the moment with your business. And it just gives clarity and calm because you're then knowing that you've done this thing for yourself that's so powerful and empowering. And it's something there that you can turn to if you need to. So I think it just really sets your mind at ease, honestly. It's made me feel like that. Like I can really put my all into my business right now because I know I've got a plan when it comes to my fertility.
This has been such a thoughtful and important conversation, and I really appreciate how you've brought the calm, clarity, and empowerment to a topic that's often presented in a very different way. So, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your work with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that your audience has taken something away from this.
Wonderful. And for our listeners, if this episode gave you something to think about or helped you feel more informed and grounded, I'd encourage you to share it with another woman in business who might benefit from hearing it. And I'll see you in the next episode of the VA Rebellion.